My name is Crystal Terrio. I will be your Master of Ceremonies for today's Journey to Peace, Seminar number 4, Fire and Fury over Japan, March 1945. For those that attended our other sessions in July and October 2024 and January 2025, welcome back. Our first sessions recounted the Pacific Campaign in the Mariana Islands from June to July 1944. Our second session focused on the air, land, and sea battles in and around Leyte, Philippines in October 1944. Our third session explored the liberation of Luzon and the escalating inhumanity in several military and civilian prisoner camps. Finally, today's events reflect the manifestation of a deliberate and wanton escalation of violence that emerged in early 1945, resulting from the dehumanizing of desired strategic outcomes. As always, we thank our audience and volunteers for their continued support. Today, we have the distinct honor of having World War II flyer John Gleeson. Please give him a warm aloha and a round of applause. Nicknamed Midnight Prowler, John Gleeson joined the U.S. Army Air Corps after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. As a flight engineer to a combat crew for a B-24 Liberator, he flew numerous harrowing combat missions as part of 8th U.S. Air Force in the European Theater of Operation during World War II. These missions included conducting dangerous covert night missions, supporting the Office of Strategic Service, where he played a crucial role that contributed to the Allied efforts to defeat Nazi Germany. Following World War II, dedicated to his country, John Gleeson volunteered for service during the Korean War. He was assigned to the 452nd Bomb Group Flight Test Department, where he flew Douglas B-26 Invaders. In 1980, he began flying with the Civil Air Patrol in Hawaii. For years, he organized aviation classes at schools and the YMCA to get young people interested in flying. He founded the Great Hawaiian Air Race, involving aircraft from several countries, and generated about $150,000 for Make-A-Wish Foundation. He was one of the founders of the Pacific Aviation Museum on Ford Island, Oahu, and served as museum director for 3 years. In June 2024, John Gleeson served as Hawaii's lone representative, commemorating the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings at Normandy, France. Mahalo to John Gleeson. We are very honored for your presence in today's seminar. We will take another moment to recognize some more special guests like the Y and the Sombrero family attending today. Today, we are honored to have special guests traveling all the way from Japan from the Tokyo Osaki Rotary Club. I would like to bring to the podium JPI board member and legal advisor, Mr. Steve Dyer, to give a formal introduction of our special guests.
You know, the organizers of this, there's maybe 8 or 10 of us, and the majority of us are members of the Pearl Harbor Rotary Club. And those of you who know Rotary know that Rotary is a worldwide organization. Its mission is peace. And so we give back to the community the best we can as Rotarians. And maybe 35 years ago, Pearl Harbor decided to form a sister club relationship with the Hiroshima Tonan Club. Tonan is Japanese for Southeast. They are the closest Rotary Club in Hiroshima to the epicenter of the atomic bomb. We thought it was very poignant, that relationship. And over the years, we've pretty much every other year, one club visits the other, and we've become very good friends. A lot of joint projects, water wells for Chuk, and all sorts of other projects. And about 15, 20 years ago, I was giving a program at a Rotary Club meeting when afterwards somebody in the audience came up, and they were Japanese, and she was visiting from Tokyo on business, and she goes, you know, my club and your club should be sister clubs. And she was from the Tokyo Osaki Rotary Club. And I thought, sounds good to me, and went back to the club. We all agreed, so then we got a second club. But what we didn't know until about 6 months ago when we started researching this, that Osaki was the area, or one of the areas, that was almost completely destroyed by our napalm bombing this week, exactly 80 years ago. And who knew? So our second sister club we have a poignant relationship with too. So it's really worked out well. I think, God works in strange ways. In any case, we're very fortunate and grateful that the president of the Osaki Rotary Club is here today, along with the International Service Director. So please welcome, first of all, the International Service Director is Teruyo Sugimoto. Just stand and say hi. And in very Japanese fashion, he came here a couple of days early and, checked it out, did a recon. For you military folks, you know what that is. Making the way for the president, who is Sugimoto Uemura. So Uemura-san. So Uemura-san, please come and address. Yeah.
Aloha, everyone.
Aloha.
I am Shigenori Uemura, the current president of the Tokyo Osaki Rotary Club, which is sister Rotary Club to the Pearl Harbor Rotary Club. On behalf of all our members, thank you for the invitation to JPI, and I am very honored to have the opportunity to say a few words. The Osaki area of Tokyo belongs to the Keihin Industrial Zone and is old center of the area. Before and during the war, light industry flourished here, and it was mixture of houses and shops. In early March 1945, this area was destroyed by napalm bombs dropped by US bombers, and many innocent people were burned to death. It was a terrible situation. This year marks the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. I was born after the war, and fortunately, my parents hardly experienced the war. Osaki has been rebuilt. It is now a vibrant area. The history of Osaki is well known, especially to older people, but it is not well known otherwise. But we should know so that such a tragedy never happened again. Like many places, including Nagasaki, Hiroshima, Manila, London, Hamburg, and Dresden, Osaki was also a victim of war. A war in which atrocities escalated, international law was ignored, and innocent civilians suffered the worst in all war-affected countries. A war also takes the lives of young people who are the future of the century, of their country. This must never be repeated. The shocking invasion of Ukraine reminds us that peace cannot be taken for granted. And that is why we must always be conscious of thinking about peace and protecting it. Now our long and strong friendship continue to build bridges between people who aspire for lasting peace and contribute to peace. Thank you.
We just had a special guest walk in, Mr. Arthur Shak. Please give him a round of applause, and his family. All right, nicknamed Guardian Angel, Arthur Art Shak, a third-generation Chinese-American, was living in Honolulu when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. Art volunteered for the U.S. Army Air Corps in September 1942 and completed his training, earning his bombardier wings, navigator wings, and a second lieutenant's commission. In March 1944, Art, as a navigator on a B-24 Liberator, deployed to a small air base near Italy and was assigned to the 484th Bomb Group, 15th Air Force. While stationed in Italy, Art and his crew flew 51 combat missions. After one flight, Art counted some 60 holes in his Guardian Angel. Another flight ended on an island in the Adriatic. On another flight, his Guardian Angel crew narrowly escaped death after 2 of the plane's engines were destroyed and gas lines were severed by enemy flank fire, and with a 500-pound bomb stuck in the bomb bay. At the end of the war, Art was assigned to the Marianas, where he witnessed the Enola Gay take off from the Tiananmen and realized the impact of the atomic bomb. He witnessed the beginning and end of World War II. For his heroic efforts, Art was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross and 3 air medals, the French Legion of Honor, and numerous campaign medals. In December 2018, Art Shak was one of 20,000 Chinese-American veterans who were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal, the highest honor in the U.S. legislative awards for their service during World War II. Mahalo to Arthur Shak and his friends and family. We're very honored for your presence in today's seminar. Before we start our formal moderate discussion, we would like to thank our partners, East-West Center, Pearl Harbor Rotary Club, West Point Society of Hawaii, and most importantly, Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum for hosting us in this venue today. I'll now hand over the program to another one of our partners and JPI board members, Miss International Hawaii, Melody Higa.
Aloha, everyone.
Aloha.
Keep this short and brief because I know we're not here for me. Just show of hands. I wanted to see who here has attended a Journey to Peace event before. Oh, that's incredible. And we have some first-timers here? Amazing. Well, either if this is your 4th event or your first, we're so grateful to have you here. It really means a lot. The work that we've been putting through this, the commitment, we can see that the panel here has put in so much work to be able to present this to you all. So we're really grateful. I really wanted to talk about the Miss International Hawaii organization and why the Journey to Peace organization is so important to me. This is actually my platform. So as the title holder, we're able to promote something in our community, and I really wanted to help push this forward to our next generation. As Miss International Hawaii, I brought this to Miss International, where I competed against 72 other contestants, and I showed the importance and the impact of having Journey to Peace. And I just came back from New York and I visited the United Nations, where I was able to kind of talk about what we're doing here in Hawaii and the rippling effect that it's making around the world. And so I'm so grateful to have this opportunity to be the voice of our generation and to have people here who are just as passionate about that. So I'm going to hand it off to Sunny to talk more about the program and how we're making an impact in our community. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, rather. So my name is Sunny Hakani. I'm an active duty Air Force member. I'm one of the program advisors for the Journey to Peace initiative. And so, as the program advisor, my goal is to help ensure that all of the profound ideas and the wisdom that comes from these panels of experts that we assemble sticks, right? And you're going to hear it now. If you've attended Journey to Peace events in the past, you've heard us refer to off-ramps. What are the off-ramps that get us out of a conflict or away from conflict? And it's a perfect analogy, because if you think about the nature of a freeway system, there are stretches where there are no off-ramps and you're committed to the path that you're on. And that at times has led us in history to very dark places. And so, what I'm concerned with is how do we get the information produced in panels like this to stick with the people who are driving or navigating the world system later on. So as far as our long-term vision for JPI, what we would like is for it to become a fellowship that connects future public servants, prospective leaders, emerging professionals with experts like these, so that they can internalize those ideas in ways that prevent us from heading down dark stretches. To get there, we're working to bring together as many professionals, as many organizations, as many stakeholders as we can to build an initial cohort of future leaders so that we can charge them with all of the wisdom and critical ideas as the substance in a kind of continuing and evolving resolution towards peace. So if you know of organizations or young emerging professionals, developing public servants who would benefit from that experience, please connect with us. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Melody or Chris. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sunny. Now, the moment you've all been waiting for. I have the honor of introducing our wonderful moderator, Karen Knudsen. Her resume is very impressive. Chair of the Board of Directors of the Japan-America Society of Hawaii and Adjunct Senior Fellow at the East-West Center. Please give a warm aloha to Karen.
Thank you very much, Crystal. This is my fourth time moderating at this really incredible program, and it is such an honor. And I'd like to really echo what others have said, and thank you for taking a Saturday afternoon and joining us here. It's so great to see repeat visitors as well as some new people, and also to see the different generations represented here. And thank you so much to our special guests, all of you. It's such an honor to have you with us today. We're also very fortunate to have a panel of people who will share their expertise, knowledge, insights, and wisdom gained from firsthand experience and their scholarly pursuit. Each panelist brings a perspective reflecting their personal, professional, military, academic, or diplomatic experience. Our first guest speaker is joining us via Zoom from the East Coast, Dr. James Scott. And thank you, James. And
hello, everybody.
This is the first time I'm meeting you. Do you go by James or Jim?
James is great.
Okay, that's great. That's great because we have a James Jim here and we know him as Jim. So, okay, thank you so much, Dr. Scott. And I understand you may have to leave early because you're on the East Coast and I think your son or daughter has a soccer game. Is that correct?
No, it's a Make-A-Wish event for my wife.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, well, I knew you had a
fundraiser.
an important family commitment. Thank you. Dr. Scott is a Pulitzer Prize finalist and former Nieman Fellow at Harvard. He is the author of the highly acclaimed books Black Snow, Rampage, Target Tokyo, The War Below, and The Attack on Liberty. And I know you're a co-author of another book and you have written many other things. So he is widely sought after as a public speaker, and he also leads battlefield tours and gives lectures around the world. He is currently the scholar in residence at the Citadel, a military college in South Carolina. Thank you so much for being with us today, sir. And
Thank you. Pleasure, mine.
next, I'd like to introduce Dan Figleaf. He is a retired lieutenant general who served in the United States Air Force. And he gets a lei. This is Ilsa. She's been with us several times. Ilsa, thank you so much for always doing these honors. Anyway, he is a retired lieutenant general who served in the United States Air Force as a jet fighter pilot, capping off his 33-year military history as PACOM's deputy commander from 2005 to 2008. And some of you may remember that prior to 2018, Indo-PACOM was called PACOM. A snapshot of his long military service includes combat experience in Serbia and Kosovo and in Operation Iraqi Freedom. Following his career in the military, Fig directed the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies for 5 years, beginning in 2012. He's the managing director of Phase -1 LLC. It's a nonprofit organization that unintentionally, maybe for hire, that he established, but he has a special interest in working toward peace in the Korean Peninsula. In October of 2023, Fig was named the honorary consul for Vietnam. For Vietnam in Hawaii, and it's a role that embraces his feelings that former enemies can work together and achieve reconciliation and mutual respect. And then to my far left is Ambassador Jim Moriarty. He's a career diplomat, having served as U.S. Ambassador to Nepal from 2004 to 2007, and to Bangladesh from 2008 to 2011. He has also served as a special assistant to the United States President and Senior Director for Asia at the National Security Council. In his role at the NSC, he advised the President and coordinated U.S. policy on East Asia, Southeast Asia, the Pacific, and South Asia. Previously, he had served as Director for China Affairs at the National Security Council and as head of the political sections at the U.S. Embassy in Beijing from 1998 to 2001, and the American Institute in Taiwan from 1995 to 1998. For the young people, you might not know, we don't have an embassy in Taiwan, but we have the AIT, which serves generally very similar, the same purpose. In 2016, he was tapped to serve as AIT chair and served in that capacity until 2023. Jim currently serves as a consultant and advisor to Indo-PACOM. To my immediate left is John Hansen, a retired Army colonel with 25 years of service in combat arms aviation. He spent 22 years in the Indo-Asia Pacific Theater. You're supposed to tap me on the shoulder and remind me to calm down. Thank you. Thank you, Ilsa. In the Indo-Asia Pacific, North, South, and Southeast Asia dialogues and workshops where he has led dialogues and taken people. He has also led teams of subject matter experts in support of the defense, institution building, and reform in South Asia and Southeast Asia. John served as the Director of Army Air Force Development in Afghanistan from 2005 to 2007, where he trained and flew with Afghan National Army air crews during Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan. Those are helicopters, sir, right?
Both.
Both helicopters and planes. The thought of a helicopter going over that terrain is impressive to me. So, he is currently a principal analyst supporting U.S. Indo-PACOM and an adjunct professor of political science at Hawaii Pacific University. John is the current president of the West Point Society of Hawaii and is a coordinating member of the Journey to Peace initiative. And I'm pleased that John will be my co-moderator today. So John, I'm going to turn it over to you for your introductory comments, and we'll get this started. Oops, all right. There you go.
Thank you, Karen. And let me just echo welcoming remarks for all of you here today on the museum's, I think, first event of the monthly series of Family Day. So I believe the plan is the first Saturday of each month to have an expanded, cheaper event for families. So thanks for coming. How about a round of applause for Elsa? Elsa is our not only our bright shining star, but she is, she represents like all of her and her generation, the future. And this whole program is organized to convey from us old folks some
for
wisdom,
yourself.
perhaps. And so I'll also echo my welcome to our guests of honor. Thank you all for being here. It's spectacular. Mr. Shak, you don't remember, but I met you as you were coming off the course at Navy Marine, and I think that day you took everyone's money. So good to see you again. So we have our guests of honor, and as I mentioned, among Elsa's generation, you are the honored guests. You are the honored guests for these panels. So I would commend you to link up with our guests of honor afterwards. Please take the time. This is probably the most interesting and diverse group of guests that we've had in our now 4th series. So please ask them questions. Think of questions now to ask them. And do that during the Q&A portion, but maybe even afterwards. Connect with them. That's the whole purpose. For centuries, we've been trying to figure out, is the human creature generally naturally good or naturally bad? And there's philosophies that have gone around both in the Western civilizations and the Eastern civilizations to kind of grapple with that. And there's very famous 17th century philosophers that have come up with various theories. I think it's an interesting academic discussion, but I think if man is generally good, then sometimes he goes off the rails. And so, Crystal, if you would just pull up slide number 15 for me. And this is what happens, perhaps, when mankind forgets about humanity. And so that's the operative word today. This is going to be a very interesting conversation, a very emotional conversation today with our panel. Humanity and warfare. It's a difficult combination. Humanity without warfare is the future. That's what we're after. So with that, I'm going to hand off to our first panelist, James Scott, because he is a little bit short for time. Our first question is on the, we can go back to the agenda slide too. We got James up, good. So we linked this event to last event, which was this revelation of significant horrors in the Pacific Theater. And so James' study on that event in the war was just a few weeks ago. And now what we're going to talk about tonight are somewhat linked in this theme of humanity. And so the question is, what's revealed about humanity in this now the 4th year of the war, at least for the U.S.? So James, with that, I'll hand it off to you, sir.
Yeah, absolutely. And I noticed in the questions you guys had sent over, you sort of expressly mentioned the Philippines campaign there. And I know you've talked about it previously, but it's worth touching on again. The Battle of Manila, in early 1945, it really kind of sets the tone for what you're going to see in the climactic last year of World War II. And that, of course, the Battle for Manila was the only urban fight of the Pacific War. It was a hellacious slog, 29-day fight in which American troops had to go up against about 17,000 Japanese troops. And it was literally a battle that was fought block by block, building by building, and ultimately room by room. And the end result of that battle was the catastrophic destruction of the city. And this, of course, was the Grand City, once known as the Pearl of the Orient. The civilian toll was tremendous. The Philippine government estimates that about 100,000 civilians died in that battle. Japanese General Tomoyuki Yamashita was ultimately tried for the deaths of about 62,000 people. So somewhere sort of in between those figures is probably the reality of it. But it was both of those figures show just how awful this one battle was. And of course, the city was almost completely destroyed, 613 blocks leveled. And of course, beyond the human loss, beyond the buildings, of course, was the cultural loss to the Philippines. And it's, it's museums, it's statues, it's archives, it's literature, it's the hospital records, it's the meteorological records dating back 3 centuries that the Jesuits had kept. I mean, so it really, that battle becomes in many ways sort of a cultural loss as well as a human and property loss as well. And of course, it happens almost simultaneously with the Battle of Iwo Jima, which is going to begin literally as Manila is unfolding. And it too is going to be a catastrophic battle. In this case, it's 36 days. It's an island that is 8 square miles. And if you've ever been there, I've actually climbed to the top of Mount Suribachi. When you look out across the island, you get a sense of just how small that battlefield really was. And yet at the end, it was 20,000 Japanese troops killed, 27,000 American casualties, including 7,000 killed. And of course, but again, same type of stuff. The battle was literally measured in some days by the yard. And of course, that then sets the precedent for Okinawa, which is going to follow in April. And again, another just horrific battle. And so what you're seeing in this last year of the war is that as sort of the sphere is tightening around Japan, the Americans don't have the ability to bypass islands like they did in the past. And of course, Japan, of course, now recognizes that with its defensive perimeter punctured, each of these islands is a final domino in many ways before the ultimate invasion of the homeland. And so the defense becomes incredibly vigorous and fierce at this point. And you also see that Japanese defenses have changed tremendously in the last year of the war. Gone are the wasteful sort of banzai charges. Gone are the sort of the purposeless beach defenses and whatnot. And what you're really seeing is these entrenched defensive structures. They're caves, they're tunnels. They're using down trees, for example. And what they're forcing is for the Americans to really have to battle in attritional warfare to try to retake these islands. And of course, that's part of the purpose, is to create massive amounts of bloodshed for the Americans, that gaining this ground is going to come at a tremendous loss of blood and ultimately treasure, with the hope that, of course, by wearing down the Americans, you can eventually have a better position at the bargaining table. And so you're going to see really these last few months of the war, and of course, Manila's February, Iwo Jima is, of course, February and March, Okinawa is April, and so you're really seeing just each of these battles, in many ways, almost worse than the previous one, particularly when you're looking at Okinawa with its tremendous toll to Japanese Americans and, of course, the civilians there. And so, of course, that's then upping the pressure then for the American Air Force to intensify the air campaign against the Japanese homeland, which is going to be, we touched on a little bit earlier with the March firebombing of Tokyo, but of course throughout March, April, May, June, July, of course, building up to the atomic attacks in August.
Thank you so much, James. Actually, let's go to Jim first in terms of a diplomatic response to what we've just witnessed in Manila. Is there? How did that unfold?
Very interesting too.
I think you can turn it on. No, that's for the. This is for the. Yeah. No, this is just for Grant.
This is just for grins.
Yeah.
It works. Okay. Anybody hear me in back? Raise your hands. Okay, great. Thank you. It's really interesting because it became clear as you're entering 1945, after the Battle of the Bulge in Europe, Germany was on its last legs and would be defeated shortly. And that made the Japanese leadership, in fact all of Japan, realize that fairly soon all of the military power of the United States and perhaps other allies would begin to focus on Japan. There were attempts to play off of this, both in Sweden and Switzerland, two of the chief neutral countries that had not sided with either side in the war. They had people working with senior Japanese military diplomats to see if they could get a peace process going, to see whether there could be some sort of negotiations leading to a peace that would, and this was probably the number one point going forward, was would lead to the retention of the emperor and keep that system in place. The U.S. side was also interested. The head of U.S. intelligence in Europe, a man named Allen Dulles. Some people probably would have heard of John Foster Dulles. Allen Dulles was the head of intelligence in Europe, and he was desperate to try and arrange talks to see if there was a way to negotiate an end to the war that would save thousands of lives. There were initial feelers sent out. There were attempts by the military attaches of Japan in Sweden and Switzerland to get Tokyo to approve talks. In one case, in the Swiss case, I'm pretty sure Switzerland and Sweden leave me confused sometimes because they're so close together in terms of the sound. But basically, there were these two separate attempts. One was kiboshed by the then Prime Minister. The other was kiboshed by having to go through military channels and being imposed by the top levels of the Chinese military. Meanwhile, you have a complicated government structure back in Tokyo. And the emperor, who reigns but does not rule. Let me explain that. That basically the emperor has been taught since he was a child that the emperor blesses what happens. He is consulted on major decisions, but those major decisions go ahead. Emperor Hirohito was appalled by what he was seeing and really wanted to find a way to get some sort of peace, some sort of honorable peace for Japan. But he actually got sidetracked by his closest advisors who said, let's go to do this through Russia. And looking in retrospect, that made no sense. The Japanese had fought two bloody wars with Russia in the 20th century. And Russia obviously had designs on islands that belonged to Japan. But in any event, the initiative went to Moscow. And again, the war is grinding on. Moscow is looking to see, do we continue? They had a neutrality pact with Japan. Do we continue that neutrality pact? Or do we jump in on the side of who's going to be the winners? And of course, you know, like any country, but particularly Stalin's, they decide that it makes more sense to go with the winners. They string things along, but basically the talks lead nowhere. And that's where we are in 1945. Aborted attempts, none of them actually getting any place. And the war grinds on, it gets worse. You have the firebombing of Tokyo, but we'll get to that in the next session.
Thank you, Jim. Next, let's look at the, after the horrors, so many horrors, how are the Allied plans affected by these revelations? So Fig, from a military perspective.
Thanks, Karen. Aloha, folks. I have to take an aside here and have a conversation with Arthur Shak. Arthur, I have a picture here. This is of my F-16 flying out of Aviano Air Base, Italy. I was the 31st Wing Commander flying combat in 1999, and the name on the side of it was Guardian Angel. How about that? A connection. The horrors of war were the horrors of war, and they weren't limited to the Pacific. There were unique nature to combat in North Africa and Italy and France and Germany and China on the island chains. But the question, as a combat fighter pilot, and Dick May's back here, he can tell stories better than I can. The thing that strikes me is, how did it become okay to bomb principally civilian populations, albeit with a military purpose? It wasn't just kill civilians. There were military purposes attributed to it. But in today's world, that's not okay, is it? I mean, when during Allied force, our collateral damage incidents that were accidental were held up as horrors of war and not acceptable and not normal. Well, how did we get for it to be normal in World War II? And there's a progression, and it's unrelated to the horrors of Manila or anything else, I think. I think it is just the progression of World War II combat. If we could put slide 21 up. Does anybody know what this work by Picasso is titled? I'm not an art guy, just stumbled across this. Guernica. It's about, and it represents the Condor Legion's attack on a civilian population in Basque part of Spain during the Spanish Civil War. And it was an attack on a civilian population. 1,000 or so people were killed, and the world was horrified. Picasso was horrified and painted this large black, white, and gray mural that became emblematic of the horrors of war and innocent people being killed. My experience in combat made me wonder, how do you distinguish between innocent and not? Because they're all dead, and they're all victims of the war. And, high explosive doesn't care very much about your innocence. So that was the first highly visible incident of civilians being killed, targeted, a civilian area being targeted. And then the Japanese bombed Chongqing. They actually, starting the next year, 1938, I think in February, bombed Chongqing, China, and many other places, but most notably the civilian population in Chongqing from 1938 to 1944. Okay, so now there's this progression of it happens in this war. In Europe, it was a combination of misunderstandings, a missed target by the Brits, retaliation by Hitler, and then just what was the accuracy and capability of the aircraft that were dropping the bombs that led to things like the firebombing of Dresden and massive civilian casualties throughout Europe. And so by 1945, it's a normal thing to do. And I think human conduct is governed by norms, what's normal, standards, what's the standard for doing something, rules, not law, but then law. And norms are probably more important. Bombing civilian areas had become normal. We did the same thing in the Korean War. The US Air Force bombed extensively in North Korea, killed over 2 million civilians, and destroyed 80% of all structures in North Korea. And then it became abnormal, right? In Vietnam, we have tried to avoid civilian casualties as much as possible, and now it's an aberration when it happens. So the question that this initiative should ask is, how do we keep that from becoming normal again? How do we keep mass casualties, especially civilian mass casualties, to become normalized based on an imperative or an existential threat? How do we conduct ourselves better? I don't have the answer, but that's what we're working towards.
Thank you. I'd like to bring James back into this. James, do you have any comments on what you've heard so far from a historian point of view, academic?
Yeah, I'll just kind of jump in on the firebombing campaign. I did a book on it, Black Snow, a number of years ago that kind of examined that. And as our previous panelists mentioned, it's sort of a long, slippery slope that leads us up to the point where we're firebombing Tokyo in March of 1945. And as he so accurately accounted for, it begins, with Guernica, it begins with Chongqing, and of course the rise of that throughout the European theater. Throughout that time period, however, the Americans had been really resistant to joining in on that, and there had been tremendous peer pressure by our British colleagues to join them in the city-busting campaign that they were flying against the British. But American air leaders, particularly guys like Jimmy Doolittle and Ira Eaker, were really resistant to doing that. And the reality was our technology, as much as we'd sort of hyped the sophistication of the Norden bomb sight, it wasn't as great as it was sold. And so there were, even as we were bombing, rail yards and things like that, we were actually still hitting civilian targets. But our policy was still very much high altitude, daylight precision bombing. And that was a policy that had been developed during the interwar years, and the idea being that it's the most accurate, humane way to go after a adversary's economy, and while minimizing civilian deaths. And that basically a modern nation is much like a house of cards, and if you go in and you knock out a few key industries like oil, bridges, things of that nature, you can sort of arrest their ability to move goods and continue the fight. And so, but of course, you know, the European war had revealed that a economy like Germany's was far more resilient than people had anticipated. The Germans were able to get raw goods and things like that from occupied countries. They were able to disperse industry and things like that. And so the air war really developed into a slog. In fact, more American airmen would die in the heavens over Europe than the Marine Corps would lose in the entire war. And in the end, the idea that we could sort of bomb our way to victory was really proven to be false when we had to come ashore in France in the summer of 1944. And so that's sort of the backdrop for how we end up in Japan. Of course, by the time we start bombing Japan, it's late 1944, and it's from the newly captured Mariana Islands, which for the first time put our bombers in range of the Japanese homeland. And of course, this isn't any ordinary bomber. This is Boeing's B-29. It's an aeronautical monster, and it's the first bomber in our arsenal that's able to cover those tremendous distances of the Pacific. A flight from Guam, Saipan, or Tinian is approximately 1,500 miles one way just to be able to get there. So round-trip flights are about 3,000 miles. But of course, we bring that philosophy of daylight, high-altitude precision bombing to the Pacific theater, and it's run by a guy by the name of Brigadier General Haywood Ansel. And he was one of the pre-war architects of our bombing campaign in Germany. He was a big believer in saving civilian lives and whatnot. But what he encountered in going in battling Japan was that the Japanese weather is really, really difficult. In fact, some months you get as little as about 3 days of clear weather for bombing. The Americans discovered for the first time the presence of the jet stream as well over the Japanese islands, which wrecked bomber accuracy and made things very, very difficult. And so Hansel's efforts to come in initially and pinpoint bomb Japan's aircraft industry really were very unsuccessful. And there was tremendous pressure at this point on the Americans, because this is taking place in late 1944, early 1945, and this is taking place as sort of the, as the violence on the ground is really beginning to sort of ramp up. You've seen it, the battles for the Mariana Islands, you've seen it for Peleliu and Palau in 1944, and now you're beginning to see it in the Philippines. Of course, we'll see it with Iwo Jima and Okinawa. And so Hap Arnold is the commander of the Army Air Forces. He fires Hansel in early 1945, and he replaces him with Major General Curtis LeMay. And of course, LeMay comes in and he initially tries to sort of follow the American strategy of daylight, high-altitude precision bombing, but he runs into the same type of problems that his predecessor had. And so that's when he then makes that decision to swap out American tactics in 1945 and to begin firebombing Japanese cities. But the reality is, LeMay gets a lot of credit for that decision, and a lot of people sort of point to it and as it is, it's very much a fulcrum on which American bombing strategy changes. But the reality was America was already moving in that direction anyway. We'd already built the perfect bomber, we'd already built the perfect flame weapon with the napalm incendiary. And our analysts had actually already begun studying Japanese cities for their incendiary tendencies. In fact, we'd already drawn up blueprints for every major Japanese cities and sort of ranked different zones of each city based on its combustibilities. Like Tokyo, for example, had 3 different incendiary zones, 1 being the most flammable, 2 being a little less, and of course the 3rd zone being even less. So by the time LeMay makes that decision, he has the perfect plane, he's got the perfect bomb, and he now has the data he needs to be able to go after those cities and where in those cities to bomb. And of course, all of that sort of is revealing that, it's not just this one pivotal moment in March of 1945. There's really this momentum that's pushing America to the point where we're going to start firebombing Japanese cities. And of course, it's a very big deal. And of course, from that moment when LeMay first burns Tokyo on the night of March 9th and 10th, it's going to begin a campaign that's going to last for 159 days. And it's going to be pretty much unrivaled for its destruction anywhere else in the war. I mean, he's going to go on to burn 64 cities, 170 square miles. I mean, Tokyo alone is going to see, over the course of a half dozen raids, 56 square miles of the capital burned. And so it's going to then become sort of the defining end of the war for how our tactics happen. But, it's, like I said, it's sort of this gradual build up to it, and then there's this massive acceleration once that decision is ultimately made.
Oh, thank you, James. And last night we had a dinner meeting, a pre-event meeting, and somebody had the quote from General LeMay about this had better be successful or we'll be tried as war criminals. Who, I don't know.
Exactly.
I don't remember who
made
said
that comment to was Robert McNamara.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Robert McNamara was actually there with the 33rd Statistical Analysis Group doing data collection during the firebombing campaign. And
So just that they had a conscience a little bit, knowing this is, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's important to note, too, that the campaign, even once that campaign begins, is how it even changes. Because initially, LeMay, in targeting Tokyo, one of his rationales was that Japan, had about 50% of Tokyo's industrial capability had been outsourced into home workshops and things like that. And so by burning big portions of the city, you could argue that, hey, workers, much of this stuff is being done in these home workshops and things like that. And so therefore, we're actually going after small industry, small shops. The latter part of the campaign, he's going after cities that don't have any industrial capability. And largely, even in their own records, they say we're going after these cities based on combustibility. So at that point, it really becomes what cities will burn.
Thank you for that. John, do you have anything you want to add or take over for a while?
Yeah, I think what I'd like to do is maybe just jump to, I'd like to get some insights, certainly from Fig and Jim as well, but jump to what lessons and cautions and warnings for today. And I think we see it unfolding as well in Europe right now with the fight in Ukraine, where clearly, the apartment building, arguably not a military target. So getting back to Fig's comment about normalization, it seems to be a bit of a backsliding. But let me hand off to you, Fig, if you've got any comments on that.
It's complicated in my head, right? I mean, and I think it's how you look at killing, at taking human life, and given the commandment against that, and the norms of killing, not just in modern society, but always. And I do spend a lot of time thinking about innocent life versus what's the not innocent life, and what makes it okay, or what differentiates how you kill. And I think about terrorists beheading a captive and how horrific that is. I'm pretty sure that my 500-pound bomb had the same amount of horror and the same amount of terror with the folks it impacted. Now, they were probably war criminals, but it's still a desensitization to killing. And I'm meandering because this swirls in my head and heart a lot. In the modern world, I worry about two things. Dehumanization of an enemy, always, and we did that in Japan, and frankly, the conduct of the Imperial Japanese Army at times made that easy, just as Nazi Germany's conduct did. But the less human you look at your enemy, the more easy it is to be indiscriminate. And the other thing that concerns me, and there's no getting away from it, is the dehumanization and also depersonalization. And as an element of that, I'd cite drone warfare. Okay, we're stuck with drone warfare, but it's as impersonal as killing can get. Whatever kind of unmanned system you use. And I think that our leaders, military and civilian, need to spend a lot of time thinking and talking about that. I was giving a lecture in Beijing in November at the People's Liberation Army Air Force Command College. Don't ask me how I got there. And one one of the one-star equivalents there in the audience asked me, do you think if we have a near-peer war, China, meaning China, US, two big modern countries, that we'll be less likely to conduct ourselves outside, we'll be more restrained? Probably not. Unless we think of it that way all the time in advance, probably not. So that conundrum of avoiding dehumanization and thinking consciously about the moral side of war, even when it's depersonalized, is something that I hope is happening in the halls of the Pentagon and the National Security Council, because otherwise it becomes too easy. There's no answer in that.
Yeah, thanks, sir. So maybe Jim, over you, maybe wrap us up. I think we lost James. He had to run. But this interesting conundrum of technological advances, clearly the B-29, and nowadays, as Fig just mentioned, all of these unmanned systems. So any thoughts on that from a diplomatic, economic standpoint?
Oh, I've got lots of thoughts. These are great comments from everybody, except perhaps for myself. I'm going to talk about somebody who lived a long, long time ago, St. Augustine. Okay? He had a theory of a just war. And basically he says the war has to be closer to, okay, sorry. A just war is only fought for a just cause. A war is only just if it is fought to defend against aggression, protect the innocent, or restore justice, not for personal gain or glory. It has to be done through legitimate authority. Only a rightful authority, like a sovereign, and that here in the United States is the people of the United States, can declare a just war. And it has to be with the right intention. It should be to achieve peace and not driven by hatred or revenge. And finally, it must be the last resort. War should only be considered after all other peaceful options have been exhausted. This longish introduction is basically a way of saying that according to every single definition, U.S. entry into World War II was for a just war. If you look at all those conditions I just read, it was just. And as we've laid out here, Fig and James, you saw it kind of spin off to the point where almost anything was okay. Quick personal digression here. In April of 1945, my father was liberated from Stalag 9 after being a guest of the German Wehrmacht for, I guess it was 5 or 6 months after the Battle of the Bulge. He was captured at the Battle of the Bulge. In April of 1945, I had two uncles, his two brothers, were serving in the U.S. Army and Navy, one each, in the Pacific. Okay, so at that point in the war, we're going to discuss this more next session. I think that almost anything that would shorten the war would have had the vast support among the American people. And because of that, as we saw, vast support among the leadership who tried to cling to standards that they knew were right, that they knew were moral, but then ultimately, in the face of failure, had to move on to something else. Lessons do we learn from that? What about diplomacy? As we said earlier, there were attempts to find those proverbial off-ramps going in, and it didn't work. It didn't work because the system in Japan was unique. It was hard for us to figure out, but more importantly, it was not responsive at the time for a variety of very complicated reasons, but basically the senior military thought it was more noble to commit hara-kiri than to surrender. and we'll get into this in the next session, but you know, they were coming up with crazy plans to force the entire nation basically to die on the beach defending against an American invasion. So that was the context as you look at these. And I would say that, and I'm going to get into perhaps some roundup thoughts here if I've got a minute.
Sure.
What does this mean to everybody in the audience? Where do you go with this? You know, I hope everybody gets out of here a little bit worried about the way things are going and thinking about what they can do about it. I'm going to issue an appeal to everybody to figure out where do they fit into all this. There is a concept called dying. When we look at deterring an adversary, we look at all of the tools of national power, national statecraft, including diplomacy, information, military, which I also consider all aspects of security, and economics. I think everybody in this room, including the young people, is going to have some influence in one of those or perhaps more of those areas as we look towards the future. And then I'm going to combine it with something that myself, you can all understand that I'm of Hawaiian extraction. You can just look at me and see my red face. No, actually, I've been here enough to really end up respecting what I have found here. And I've always felt this feeling of aloha. My wife is a big Hawaiian Chinese family. My son's wife's family is a big Japanese, Chinese, Hawaiian, Haole family. And I've always been treated with aloha. And I just recently heard the best definition that I ever heard of with respect to aloha. And that is to treat everybody with dignity and respect. And as you go about your lives in the future, if you follow that and you go down that path, I think you're going to be taking those baby steps that over time lead to real progress in trying to calm things down, make sure that there are off-ramps of understanding, of comprehension of the other side as we go forward. I'm sorry I took way too much.
Actually, Fig, yeah, as we kind of wrap this up a little bit, because we want to hear from the audience, please, Fig, any words of wisdom, thought, things mulling through your brain on this?
There are lots of, There are lots of things mulling through my brain. Jim, thanks for the revisit to what's a just war, and then what are just practices comes from that, right, during the war. What I'd like to ask folks to look at is the cases that present themselves where we could wind up back in a more general conflict that leads to the level of death and destruction, world-changing death and destruction. And I suppose Ukraine might be that, but I know that China-Taiwan could be, and I know that conflict with nuclear-armed North Korea could be. And how do we work in a principled manner, not in appeasement, to prevent that from happening? I have lots of ideas on that, and that's why I do what I do regarding North Korea. The other thing I'd say is some of this may seem abstract. To personalize it and to lead into the session on the Battle of Okinawa, I strongly urge you to read, if you haven't already, E.B. Sledge's book, With the Old Breed. It's a story of his combat as a Marine rifleman on Peleliu in Okinawa. He was a journalist when he entered the war, just a Marine rifleman, but it's a very complete look at the nature of warfare and the associated killing.
Thank you so much. I'm going to turn this back to John. And also, I don't think we didn't recognize some of the, we have Boy Scouts here. Is that an ROTC? So are you, sir? Civil Air Patrol. I'm sorry, you look very young. Everybody looks very young to me, so thank you. Yes. But anyway, I just wanted to acknowledge that we also have Boy Scouts here as well. So John, do you want to, before we go into questions, your final thoughts about all of this?
Well, thank you. Again, I appreciate all the comments. This is one of the better panels. We get better every time, and so Fig and Jim, thank you, and James. It's great to have academic, that quality of an academic background join us. So I do want to highlight that we do have at least 2 more of these sessions, but I don't want to take any more time. Just again to thank everybody. We'll do that again at the end. But I'd like to open it up to you all for questions, and I think we're going to pass around microphones, and we have a question here. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you much. Not so much a question, just a statement. First of all, General Leaf talked about some of the perspective that you feel when you're flying in combat in the air. And as a fellow fighter pilot, I would wholeheartedly agree with what he said. Just a quick anecdote or two. Of the several hundred combat missions I flew in Vietnam, a number of them were flown as a single ship fast forward air controller, armed forward air controller in North Vietnam. Every day I passed villages, fishing villages, or farms where people would pull out an AK-47 and shoot at me. If the golden BB had hit me, I'd have died. But I simply dodged that because I saw those not as serious combatants, but as people who were, from their perspective, defending their homeland against aggression. On the other hand, I was called in to just across the border where an Army unit was being pounded from a higher elevation by a Russian-built tank that was firing on their position. And when you get into a dire situation, the ground commander said, "I'll give you my initials," which means if you don't do it right and you kill friendlies, I accept responsibility. So after a couple of heart-stopping attempts to get through the weather and do that, I was able to put a 500-pound laser-guided bomb, a GBU-82, on the turret of that tank and watch that tank torn to pieces violently. When I went home that night, the beer was cold, and I was quite satisfied with what I'd done with no remorse, because that was a combatant threatening fellow combatants on my team, if you will. On the other hand, the great satisfaction to me is that I never killed a friendly, and I did my very best never to kill a serious non-combatant on the other side. And I think that's the crux of thinking humans in an aircraft, and a thinking person thinking about controlling drones as well. I don't know how this evolves if you're in a conflict with a major combatant like China. I don't think you feel that you are out for revenge if you're personally threatened. I don't think that bothers you much. I think if you feel that your nation's existence is threatened, that's where we may devolve into deciding that it's acceptable to adopt larger and larger measures of what we call collateral damage. So thinking people in cockpits, thinking people controlling weapon systems, thinking about the battle, maybe one of the things that keeps us on the better side of not falling into revenge or desensitization to collateral damage. Thanks.
Dick, thanks a lot. We should get together and share stories as we have many times in the past. He's got better ones. There's a flip side to that, thinking human. And I did a webinar here for the museum a couple of years ago with Colonel Ed Hawkins about the Korean airliner shot down by Soviet Su-15 back in September 1st, 1983. I was the first F-15 pilot on alert to cover the response to that. Me and my wingman were put out in our F-15s at Masao. We'd gone to Masao from Kadena, and we had very liberal rules of engagements. Go kill MiGs. If the Soviets challenged the search effort, go kill them. The point I want to make is, we thought we were on the start of World War III. There was absolutely no place else we wanted to be. We were ready to go kill MiGs. And our leaders and our citizens have to remember, we put people out there just like that, who've been training their entire life to do the deed in combat, to serve honorably and bravely in combat. And you can't count on the person at the tip of the spear to keep things from a situation from devolving. So we need processes and systems and governments and diplomatic relations to prevent it. Because once the stuff hits the fan, it's going to happen.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Go ahead. Does somebody else have the mic? Okay, mic over here, and then we'll go to this gentleman. So,
Okay.
right back there.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a great opportunity for the public to hear these very candid comments on this topic. And thank you to the Journey's originators here allowed this. But my question is, in my day there was the Geneva Convention, and is that still the standard by which wars are supposed to be fought, or has that been preempted now, or is that even in existence? Your comments.
Ellen, I couldn't see you out there because of the lights, but yes. Sig, did you want to?
Hey, Alan, thanks. That goes back to the hierarchy of laws, rules, standards, norms up there with laws, the Geneva Convention as a treaty, and the law of armed conflict that U.S. fighting members of the military combatants are all trained in and make every effort to adhere to. But that takes two to tango. So when you're fighting an unlawful combatant, and we've seen that in some of the transnational terrorist threats, you can be drawn into circumstances that take you away from your rules, your laws, even your morals. They still exist. As Americans, we have to adhere to that, but that's no guarantee that we'll stay within those boundaries, depending on the adversary.
Jim, did you want to comment on that? No.
I think you did it well, basically. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, basically, Geneva Convention is still in existence. It's still supposed to be the norm. I think you could ask the Ukrainians whether the Russians are adhering to it. And that's the problem. You look at what's happening now, and you have an increasing number of states who don't feel like they are bound by it. You've got an international criminal court that seems ineffectual. So you do have a very rapid deterioration with respect to norms. And without the norms, then abhorrent behavior becomes more the norm for certain types of states.
A different treaty, an area of great interest to me, that I think is worth mentioning because it does govern international behavior, is the Treaty on Nuclear Non-Proliferation. I believe that's the most important treaty that certainly in my lifetime. And it's one of the questions about North Korea and what we say about North Korea's nuclear capability. And I think it says to me we should never accept their nuclear capability as a matter of acceptable an acceptable situation. They were a signature on the NPT, as it's called, and they withdrew illegitimately, and they developed their nuclear capability. They're the only country that did that. Israel, Pakistan, and India developed their nuclear capability without being signatories, but we cannot say it's okay to violate the nuclear treaty on nuclear non-proliferation, or the treaty becomes worthless. We may never get them to denuclearize. That always has to be our goal. And we have to recognize the value of that bit of international governance, that treaty.
Thank you, sir.
So in World War II, American cities were not firebombed, mostly because we have these giant oceans on both sides of the United States, and we were kind of out of range. But what's really stopping that from happening today? You know, what's to stop people from, you know, destroying our cities, in modern times? And also, I'd kind of like to hear from our World War II vets that were like dishing it out and their thoughts of, you know, being in battle.
Okay. Who wants to take this one?
Yeah, there is definitely a real danger
Do you hand him that?
of escalation that might lead to an exchange with cities on both sides of the Pacific taken out. And that's one of the many reasons why, we have to make sure we don't get to that stage. We have to make sure that even if there is tension, even if there is a crisis, that the crisis does not lead to an escalatory ladder that ends up with the leaders of the two sides having to decide whether they're going to launch attacks about the homelands, against the homelands of the other side. And we need to make sure that that never comes to pass.
Sir, if I could, would you be okay with having the conversations with our veterans afterwards? And just to make it easier for them to kind of engage, if that's okay with everybody. Is everybody? Okay.
Thank you very much. Did we answer your questions about the homeland?
I'd like to challenge a Boy Scout in the back to ask a question. Any scout? They're still here. I can't really see back there.
I think we have. Is he walking?
Okay.
Is he walking toward a mic or walking away?
Okay, good. Go ahead.
Great.
Can't really see who that is.
I think it's a
Oh,
son.
Gordon.
Yeah.
Mr. or Colonel Hanson. I guess, could you elaborate a little bit more? Not elaborate. Could you talk a little bit about Geneva code violations in Ukraine currently?
Geneva Convention violations.
No.
Oh!
Okay. Intentional targeting of civilian targets, I think, is probably the one that goes on every single day. They're not trying to hit military-related targets. Other reports that I think are fairly reliable, including bizarre things like taking children out of Ukraine to send them to Russia to be brought up there. I'm pretty sure that's inconsistent with the Geneva Convention, but I'm not really a lawyer. But not having any attempt to spare casualties among the civilian population is by far the most obvious. And they are conducting an attempt to sort of break Ukrainian morale by terrorizing the Ukrainian public.
And I'm not sure, Jim, if those are violations of the Geneva Convention, which is, my focus on that is on the treatment of combatants once captured, I think, or the law of armed conflict, both relevant. But there's something I want to say about my favorite word here, norms. If you took a map of the world and color-coded it for, not like slide 15, which is just a bar chart of casualties, but color-coded it to show the civilian casualties per capita. There are two areas in the world that were most affected per capita. What percent of the local population was killed? One of them will be addressed in the next session, Okinawa. The other region is what is now Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia. Significantly worse than almost anywhere else on the globe. And that is a normalization. Does that reflect their history and culture? Or does that mean that that kind of thing became normal and remains normal? I don't know. But it can't be a coincidence.
Thanks for that question. I would just add also that once the war is underway, we've had some fairly egregious outcomes. But a war of aggression that started is in and of itself a serious issue, and in the global community is a violation. What makes it even more interesting to me and odd is that in 1945, when we got together to establish a body that could secure the world, the victors of World War II, the Security Council, they're charged to not prosecute war, but to secure the world from it. And fast forward now, we've got one of the permanent members of the Security Council aggressing against its neighbor, which is a problem, obviously, and odd, to say the least. So it's getting back to the St. Augustine, justice in war, which was your question, Gordon. Backing off of that is the just war itself. There doesn't seem to be any rationale there. Again, from one of the permanent members of the Security Council prosecuting that. So hope that answers your question. And now you need to get your senior patrolman to ask one, if he's still here.
I don't see him.
Okay, Vic, while we're waiting.
Could that be one reason why Putin has said it's not really a war, it's not really warfare, it's really a special military operation, quote unquote, and so therefore he can justify the fact that, hey, he's committing perhaps war crimes, although it's not a war, and therefore the Geneva Conventions don't apply. In other words, I can go ahead and bomb Ukrainian infrastructure, bomb their hospitals, their shopping centers, their infrastructure, just wipe out as much of the Ukrainian as I possibly can. Whereas the Ukrainian side is trying at least to go after military targets. So, I just want to bring that up, that I think perhaps the Geneva Conventions don't, according to Putin, don't apply here.
Okay, so I'm for the people in the back, they may not have heard that, and I'm gonna hand off to the panelists on it. The question is, since it's being parsed by the aggressor that it's really not a war, that it's something short of war, and therefore the activities within it are something different, whether it's some kind of massive civilian action, security action. But let's go ahead and take that, Vic.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And if you look at Putin's MO, the way he's done things since he took power, it's never having a war with any of its neighbors. It's having little green men show up who support the annexation of the Donbass to Russia. I would also add, I think it's probably an easier sell in Russia. Rather, people I think still remember World War II, and if Putin can assure them that that's not what they're doing now, it's not going to lead that direction. And to your point, it probably helps them domestically.
I'm going to pull us away from that conflict, just because if they couldn't solve it in the Oval Office yesterday, we're probably not going to here today. I'm just saying. But it doesn't mean that I think it's irrelevant. The question of are you at war or not is one that has challenged the United States of America since the end of World War II. Korea was a police action. The Vietnam War was undeclared. The NATO action in Serbia and Kosovo, name it. That was also on the ground for the invasion of Iraq in 2003 as the senior airman with the invading land forces. Was that a war of aggression? Well, they started it. That's complicated. I think it makes discussions about our War Powers Act, Congress's role in declaring and approving war expenditures are always relevant. And how you get to conflict, how you get to war for this democracy is very important. And that's one of the things that trouble me about how easy drone warfare and other indirect means, I'm not sure what to call them, depersonalized ways of waging war are, because they're dismissed as different. I think there was another strike against an ISIS or Al-Qaeda or whatever target in the last 24 hours. I'm not sad that this bad guy is gone, but I do worry about what it means that we can just, as outliers, say we're going to do this. I think our democracy should be more measured and more formal about conducting combat operations, and that both in the executive and legislative branch there should be more, not less, discussion.
In the back?
How can we ensure that the future generations are able to be taught on different ethical approaches so that new wars are less likely to happen?
Yeah, I guess in a way that's the core question that we're trying to leave you with, which is, what can you do to affect the future? What can you do to try and avoid these horrible outcomes that we spent most of today talking about? And first of all, it's being active in whatever field you take and trying to remain outside the field at the same time. You know, read, watch, listen. And that last one is probably the most important. Listen to the other side. Listen to the people whose views are slightly different from you. And then you can make intelligent, well-informed decisions about the best way that you can contribute to avoiding these horrible outcomes. I love history. Lots of people don't. Try and learn a little bit about what's gone wrong in the past. Apply that as you look at the future. I mean, I always quote Mark Twain, who said that something along the lines that history never repeats itself, but it often rhymes. As we see aggressive nations in our decade trying to make war a new norm, trying to take aggression against smaller powers as a given of any international order, we've got to learn from the mistakes of the 1930s. How in the 1930s you had similar problems, obvious problems, and you had many steps toward the breakout of World War II and also the breakout of all-out war in Asia. There were many steps, many mistakes made by many people, including America. If we learn from those mistakes, we might be able to make sure that we never repeat them or never even rhyme with them. And that should be the goal.
Okay, we're sort of nearing the end, but we don't want to cut anybody off with a question.
Back corner there.
Oh, okay, so in the back, and then we'll move up here. So in the back.
Perfect, yeah. So just kind of following up from the previous question, first, before I actually get in, I want to thank everybody in this room for coming to this event. I think this is my first time coming, and I've learned so much just with the few hours we've been here. And I want to thank all of our armed service men and women who've served our country and paving the path for future leaders like me who are coming into the military. And I'm so fortunate to be surrounded by so many great people and serving the great United States of America. But going to my question, we've had, with all our history, no one's perfect. We've had our, whoops-a-daisies here and there, and just unfortunate incidents. And my one incident that really was not memorable to me, or not memorable, but I would say it's something that sticks out to me is the massacre of My Lai. I think that's a very important thing in leadership. And I think just fast forward to the question. I was at United States Military Academy, West Point, class of 27, on a academic leave right now. But I think my question is, at West Point, they do such a good job at, good leaders have make good decisions that are not illegal, immoral, or unethical. It's easy to, identify that, but I think the hardest, learning from experiences, the hardest is how do you go about questioning in order, or just going about in general in order that is given that is illegal, unethical, or immoral. So my question to the panel is, God forbid that someone has to come across that. What would your recommendation be on handling that sort of order?
Wow, that's good.
That's kind of the ultimate hypothetical. Because in what circumstances, the order from whom. My Lai was a unique set of circumstances and a unique set of leaders and soldiers. So it's its own case. I believe that our military does an excellent job of teaching ethical conduct, including in combat. I think that to ensure we have that, the notion of leading by example, not just of addressing an issue that you take issue with, an order, a directive, but tolerating folks addressing those who serve under you as an officer or in any leadership capacity, building a climate where people speak up. I think we've already got that. That doesn't mean that you can't have relatively isolated incidents. I think it is woven through our American military DNA, but it has to be reinforced. And there are ways to screw it up. And if you look at current events on both sides of the political spectrum, being prescriptive about what can be talked about and what can't be talked about is dangerous. So having a right way and a wrong way on any side of a political discussion, for example, is not helpful. We have to be able to speak freely within the bounds of our duties, of course, but there can't, political correctness, whatever part of the political spectrum it comes from, is not helpful for building a critical thinking leadership cadre in the U.S. military.
Thank you. John, as a fellow West Pointer, anything you want to say to the young man?
Yeah, well, a couple things. Welcome and thank you for taking your leave time to join us. That's impressive. What company are you in?
F2.
Okay.
Go Zeus, sir.
All right, great. And to echo what General Leaf just described, and even before that, war, a declared war is a different set of circumstances than something that we found ourselves in Vietnam. And so right from the start, the complexities of rules of engagement and mixing it up with non-combatants routinely in this situation really require a tremendous amount of courage at the junior officer level to do the right thing. As the General mentioned, it's a whole bunch of things going on. Command climate especially, there's a desire for retribution. There's some metrics that have to be met in a grotesque fashion. Those are all part of it, but I think our junior leaders know what right looks like. You know what the Constitution says. You know what the laws of war are. It's easy for me sitting up here in the comfort of Hawaii to judge what must have been an awful high-pressure scenario with casualties. But there's no easy answer other than, drawing on your moral compass that you already have if you're at the military academy, and being courageous, and instilling in your sphere as a platoon leader the climate for everyone in your platoon that you're not going to tolerate the things that are not right. It doesn't have to be combat. In fact, it's more often than not some making an exception here, approximation there, kind of, doing something that's unethical. That's a challenge. And so telling leadership, no, I'm not doing that because it's illegal or immoral, that's a tough one. You have to kind of instill that in your sphere of leadership command.
And then here, sir.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. My question for you, particularly General Leaf, is that as General May seemed to hit an inflection point in his strategy where he shifted from attacking the industrial centers of gravity of Japan to then seeking to break the will of the Japanese people through the firebombing campaign by looking at combustible structures, as you all said. These are very much influences of Julio Duhay, the theorist that we learned about air power from early in the 20th century. We have these influences on our thought and our approaches to warfare. So my question to you gentlemen is that we look at our modern framework and our theories that we're using today as we've shifted to precision bombing and the coin campaigns that we've fought most recently. How then do we look at the new wars that we're facing in large-scale combat operations and the potential new theories or new ideas that we'd have to look at? So what are the new ideas that you all would recommend we consider in our approach to modern warfare?
How many days do you have to talk about this? I mean, that's a great question and worth pondering, but very broad. I'm not a theoreticist. I didn't practice theoretical air power. I practiced practical air power. And I doubt that LeMay did either. I doubt that he was, and I'm speculating, Your Honor, but I doubt that he had Duhay's or anybody else's book out in front of him. He had a job to do. And I've been in this situation in combat where what you're doing isn't working. So you figure out something else to do. And some of maybe the theoretical thinkers and certainly the technical side of fire campaign, but what he was doing wasn't working. And he had a job to do. And he was seeking a means to do it. In the modern world where we are far more precise, don't be deceived by that. The people we hit precisely are just as dead. And in fact, I often, given a choice, let's say I'm given a job as an F-16 pilot in the war I flew in, and I've got to achieve something. I would much rather have a 2,000-pound bomb, just because of the impact. And I don't mean the impact, I mean the psychological impact on an enemy that's trying to conduct ethnic cleansing. So, we could be as precise as imaginable, chimney precise, however you want to describe it. But if you have to fight a large enemy on a large scale, those are going to be pinpricks. And you're going to have to adapt. So, if you and I could sit down and talk through every possible scenario, it'd take us forever. I think what I would highlight out of your question is that we have been a little bit misled by small wars with enemies that have limited capability, certainly limited capability against our air power. And that a next different war could require a much broader approach to target and human destruction. Another reason not to do it.
So, Yeah, thank you, Fig, and thank you all for your question. Oh, go ahead. You have a question, sir.
No.
If I may.
Yes.
What occurs to me in listening to your testimony, the things you have to say, is that there's a perplexing, almost impossibility to conduct war in a perfectly moral manner. All of the alternatives are terrible, and they get worse. And the reason we're here today is so that we realize how bad it is and get as many people as possible to understand that, so that they apply the maximum amount of effort to never have it happen. Because there is no answer. That's what I've been hearing in these sessions. There is no easy answer, and there may not be an answer, period. We're not here to figure out a moral way to conduct a war. We're here to conduct a journey to peace. And one of the things I liked when I listened was Ambassador Moriarty talking about aloha. And that may seem very simplistic, and I'm trying to think of the terminology for it, but I think there's a connection that we have and can have with the citizens of other countries, whether it's Iran, whether it's citizens of Russia, of China. We have to figure out a way to make a connection with them, because the problem in the world is not the citizens in the world. The problem in the world is those who have seized power and have evil intent, and they don't honor any rules. So how do you do that? One of the other things that I really like to hear also from Ambassador Moriarty is listening to the other side. Part of the journey to peace is listening to the other side, and I think also knowing the history of the situation. Vietnam, our leadership proceeded based upon general principles, but they really didn't understand the historically what was going on, and that there were avenues that we could have taken. And that's part of listening, is part of that is knowing and exploring that. We have to connect with the people that matter. Just like the people who vote in our country are important, the people who vote in other countries or don't get to vote. I think that there are two answers: peace through strength on the one hand, and then intelligent engagement. And I know that, I'm going a little long here, but I know that General Leaf has a whole plan that has to do with Korea, based upon studying it, knowing it, and that we can't go through simplistic answers. We have to go through the kind of answers that General Leaf has with respect to Korea, with respect to other areas like Ukraine, like the Mideast, like China. We have to do all of that work so we never get to where things got in World War II.
Thank you. With that, I'm going to hand the microphone to John to give final remarks.
Thanks, Karen. Jim, did you want to make any comments there? Or?
Deterrence isn't easy, but that's where we all have to be thinking of. And that does involve the things that I was talking about earlier, the whole time construct. And as I said earlier, the building blocks of that are listening to the other side, but also having the other side listen to you. Right now, I say that we have to be throwing as much spaghetti against the wall as possible. As many people making clear to their counterparts in China or meeting people in China just where our interests lie and what we think is important, and how do we, working together, get to a more peaceful place And how do we all avoid that which we have to avoid? So, that's not a terrific answer because your question is so difficult and it's what people spend many years of their lives trying to address.
And it's not all hugs and kisses. In the China case, it's not about hugging pandas. When I talk to folks in China, one of the things I tell them is, I hope your son's not a PLA sailor, because if you try to cross the Taiwan Strait, it's gonna suck. And it is. And if you go to Taiwan, that's gonna suck too, militarily, because any victory will be a Pyrrhic victory. So I think there is a place for the tough talk of deterrence. Unfortunately, in the China case, the citizen-to-citizen engagement is very difficult and matters little. We have a very small group of folks who, at least for the next period of time, are going to determine the path that China chooses. And they will not be influenced by Rotary Club to Rotary Club engagement, sadly.
We have one person in China who will make all the important decisions. And, what Fig is describing is what I describe as throwing as much spaghetti against the wall. If things really start heating up, we're not going to be talking to him. History suggests it's just going to be impossible. He won't pick up the phone if the U.S. president calls. History and the way he acts makes me fairly certain of that. But I'm equally certain that he wants to decide how he leaves the presidential palace. He does not want his fate decided by anything else. He equally wants the Communist Party of China to remain in charge. And those are the points where we apply the deterrence. Making it clear that something like an invasion of Taiwan, or also something probably more likely, killing Filipino sailors in the South China Sea, is going to be a threat to both of those. He might end up forcing a reaction that could make his own hold on power a little bit shaky, and would make people in the party begin to think, wait a sec, this is going down a very dangerous road. Those are the areas where we probably have leverage. The economic stuff, that's huge also, but it's a tremendously difficult problem when you have a near peer whose economy is almost as developed as ours. And we will be working it for the next 10, 20, 30 years, I hope. Because that means nothing has broken out and we continue to have some sort of peace on our globe.
Yeah, I would just real briefly say, and the data shows us, political science, that democracies don't usually go to war against each other. And so what we're talking about here is other variances on governance, authoritarianism. But the question I would leave all of you with is what are the off-ramps, what are the warnings, what are the cautions we see right now? I think we've highlighted several, your questions have brought out some. So think that over, and as we wrap up here, you can bounce those off of us and our World War II veterans here, our visitors from Japan. We've got a really unique opportunity right now, so don't miss out on it. I'm going to hand off now to Gil, if he's here, to kind of wrap us up, and we've got a brief presentation.
Thank you, John. Oh. Thanks, John. Thanks, John. Can you all hear me? I'm sorry to have to use this microphone, but I wanted to thank Bob, because Bob, you said some things that I was going to say as I get up here. I want to remind everybody of why we are here. Why do we do this? Why do we talk about war when in fact our overall mission is to get on that journey to peace? It is to develop networks of young people. There aren't too many young people in the room right now. There need to be more. but we hope aspirationally to build relationships between young people here in Hawaii and mainland, in the rest of the Indo-Pacific region, Japan, Korea, Russia, China, Philippines, Singapore. I could go on and name countries. But we want to bring those young people together because we're not going to, normally we're probably not, in spite of what Fig thinks, we're probably not going to avoid wars that are already moving toward conflict. Not in the short term. We hope that by developing relationships among young people, we can head off a war 30, 40, 50, 100 years from now. By establishing linkages between people, by creating channels for communication. 2 nights ago at dinner, Jim, you mentioned those channels that might open up once people get to know each other. Because as Bob mentioned, the key word here is understanding, and maybe the even keyer word is empathy. Developing a sense of empathy between and among the peoples of the earth, so that they understand that, yes, we may not have a perfect peace right now, but to make a more perfect peace, we don't need to go through war to make that happen. Is there a fighter pilot in the room? Is there a fighter pilot? A fighter pilot?
Yes.
Oh, that's an Apache pilot.
Of course.
So a Kiowa warrior pilot. A fighter pilot. If I may, thank you so much for being a part of this effort. Fig Leaf, we have something for you.
Uh-oh.
It's a hook. This hook is given to a panelist who works with us for his or her first time. And it's Fig's first time, and we've got him hooked now. He is with us for the duration. Thank God. It's great to have you here with us. I want to thank our panelists. We know Jim, Fig, John, our moderator Karen, James, who was up here on the screen. And I want to let you know that the chart up here is wrong. We're going to go for May 17th, the following weekend. And the reason for that is that our good friend and a member of our advisory board, John McManus, will be in town. He's been invited here to the island to speak by the Association of the United States Army at a conference that goes on that week. And the better day for John McManus is the 17th of May, and that's what we'll stick with. So discount this, go for the 17th of May. That'll be a great discussion about the Battle of Okinawa, which was clearly a pivotal point in the war in the Pacific, a horrible situation for the people of Okinawa and for their soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines who had to fight there on both sides. Thank you all very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all.
All right, because we have a lawyer on the room and in the board, I must give a disclaimer. JPI is an unincorporated collection of individuals. Any and all opinions expressed are purely those of the speakers and do not necessarily represent the opinions of any legal entity. All right, complete. As a memento and thanks for attending today's session, we have given out JPI session number 4 certificates for coming today. Mahalo. This concludes our presentation.
Thank you.